Now, how much will the demands for a fresh constitution test Nigeria? Is it likely to lead to a change in the fortunes of this country, even if most people agree that this country needs a structural overhaul, as one commentator put it? With Nigeria's economy in dire straits, the country is stuck with low growth, massive debt, aging infrastructure, and a crushing cost of living crisis. With its security in jeopardy, its people divided, and millions of voices rising daily in protests, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Nigeria is a very troubled nation and is wrestling with massive, almost brutal problems. So how can the giant of Africa reboot itself? What is the relationship between a new constitution and the high cost of living that is presently bedeviling Nigeria with poverty and protests? Can restructuring along more democratic lines help to strengthen Nigeria's fledgling institutions? Well, for their perspectives on this and other issues, I'm joined now in the studio by the author, columnist, and former member of the House of Representatives, Dr. Dakuku Peterside, and by the policy strategist and group CEO of the global investment and trade company, Baba Yusuf. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Great to see you again. I'll come to you, Dr. Dakuku, first. Somebody on the YouTube comments page, of all places, said a new constitution is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for progress in Nigeria. What's your take on that?
I totally agree with the person. I don't know who the person is. I've not read the comment, but that's my position. Now, for today, Nigeria is facing a number of challenges, and I'd like to elaborate on some of these challenges. We're facing serious economic challenge. One, we're facing a system of value orientation challenge, and we're facing security challenge. Now, if you look at these three key challenges Nigeria is facing, I don't think that putting in place a new constitution can solve any of these challenges. If you like, you can call them triple challenge. None. And so, a new constitution, and I like to do this analogy for us to understand that if you have built a house, it's got many problems. You have two options. You can bring down the entire house and put a new foundation in place, or you can begin to fix the house. But where will you stay if you bring down the whole house? And that applies, to the country. So if we say that the constitution is faulty, is not pro-people, yes, it could be dealt with. And there's nothing that says that we cannot deal with all of these issues simultaneously. But like whoever that person is that expressed that opinion, I totally agree that a new constitution is not sufficient to fix our challenges. It might be necessary. It is necessary. But not enough to fix the challenge of our value crisis. Now look at the issue of corruption. Is that a constitutional issue? It's a value problem. If you look at the issue of, greed by public officials, by changing the constitution, putting laws in place, are there adequate laws to deal with the value challenges we're facing? Of course, we have a lot. Is it being enforced? Is it producing the desired outcome? The answer is no. So you can see the multidimensional perspective of our challenge.
Right.
And the fact that the constitution is not just enough.
I understand that. Let me come to you, Baba Yusuf, because the other argument that's being made is that the need for a constitutional fundamental root and branch reform of the constitution is necessary, because the things that Dr. Peterside talked about, everybody is cognizant of them, but that if you do not reform the constitution and change the way that things are, for example, security, managing security is a difficult problem for the center, for the federal government, because all powers are concentrated there. That unless you reform that, you're not going to have security touching the people and a whole host of other things, and strengthen the institutions as a result of that constitution. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, on this issue that we're talking about.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome back.
Thank you.
Good question. I am a proponent of constitutional, overhaul. And I think there's a general consensus on that. The argument is the hows and the whens. And if we step back a little bit, 25 years from 1999 to date, we've had the Waste report, we've had the El Rufai committee report. This speaks to the importance of the need for us to overhaul the constitution.
And you've got the 2014 confab.
That is the 2014 confab is actually the one I want to talk about. Thank you for that. But importantly, Charles, this is a country that the political class, the traditional institutions, and all leaders are leading. And there has been a cry by the almost entire populace of this country with regards to concerns about injustice, about inequality, about corruption, and all that. And I humbly believe that part of the problem, as much as execution and implementation is a key issue, the provisions of the Constitution encourages the lack of implementation, with due respect. And I'll take the analogy of dock with regards to the building. If you make a building that is on a faulty foundation, or you build on a swamp without the necessary decking, you will just have to find a way to have another foundation. Because this is a country of about 200 and something million people. This Constitution, 1999, go back and check out the number of the population of the country at that time and the myriad of issues. So if those fundamental issues are not addressed, for example, in terms of economy, the cost of governance, the political system that we have adopted, we are using, is going to be addressed. For example, the issues of even flouting or refusing to follow court orders by government officials, the issues of immunity clause for the governors and all that will be addressed. Issue of security, we are having the conversations about state policing and all that. So I believe that the hue and cry about whether it is important or not is not the issue. As a strategist, I will tell you this. This should be part of an overarching strategy for this administration. And you have a sequencing within the strategy to say, when do we start having this conversation? And with that, I align with the Patriots to say they have taken the initiative to kickstart a conversation, a serious conversation with the president. I like his response to that effect, but I agree that we have pressing issues. However, Mr. President should be working with a strategy, and that is my concern with this administration. I've been saying, do we have an overarching strategy? Do we have a blueprint? Do we have an action plan? Are we reviewing and milestoning? And within that, we have this conversation and key in this within a process to say, is it between now and 2027? Are we going to have the process initiated, or when is it going to land? But for Nigeria to evolve, we must eyeball this issue of the constitutional overhaul, over and beyond this perennial constitutional amendment by the National Assembly, which are mostly driven by some political agendas.
Yeah, that's a good point. But in fairness to the president, and I don't speak for them, but just in fairness to them, they invited the Patriots. The Patriots had talked several months ago about the possibility of going to see them.
In fact, 4 months ago.
But they invited them over. And so the president obviously felt that the timing was right to bring them in.
Absolutely.
But Dr. Peterside, you wrote a very interesting article recently. I always read your articles. I think most of them are very well written. But you wrote a very interesting article about the protesters and the whole protest movement, and whether or not, you know, what they were protesting about, anybody was listening to them and all the rest of it. Do you think the protesters would be ameliorated by moves, just as Baba Yusuf, I think, very articulately pointed out there? Those protests were partly about bad governance. I mean, do you think the protesters would be ameliorated by moves towards a new constitution? Would they be pacified if the president came out and made positive noises about it? Or would they insist that the things they are asking for, such as the return of fuel subsidy, etc., are completely unrelated to calls for a people's constitution?
All right. You see, I've made a point.
Right.
That a new constitution is desirable. But it is not a silver bullet that will solve all our problems. That's the core point I've tried to stress. Now, the economic issues, and indeed the immediate spark plug for the protest are the two reform policies of the current administration. One is the removal of fuel subsidy. The second one is the floating of the currency against foreign currencies. The protesters are asking for reform of government. Reform of government is not necessarily the same thing as a new constitution. And so you could have a new constitution and we continue with this tradition of waste, corruption, nepotism that have characterized our political landscape. So beyond the call for a new constitution, there are value issues we need to address. There are structural issues we need to address. And there are economic issues we need to address. Hunger is not directly a fallout of the constitution that we operate. And you know, whether the parliamentary system, the presidential system, there's a global wave of discontent in Bangladesh, in the United Kingdom, in many other countries. And they are not practicing the same system of government. And it has nothing to do with their constitution. It is purely a product. There's a perception of poor management of the economy. And government actions are wrapped in their policy package. The average Nigerian does not believe rather that government is putting her best foot forward in managing the economy.
I think you've got a good point there. Nevertheless, it's also important to point out, and I'm coming to you, Baba Yusuf, it's important to point out that every country, you can't assess them all. Yes, there is a common thread, which is the fact that they believe that governance is bad, essentially. But there are different ways to arrive at good governance depending on what is prevalent
Your context.
in different countries. But let me ask you this, Baba Yusuf. One of the analysts that we regularly feature here, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, reckons that Nigeria's problems, sort of along the lines of what Dr. Peterside is saying, reckons that Nigeria's problems are not constitutional but attitudinal. He reckons that the focus should be on strengthening this country's institutions, finding ways of making the country's leaders lead by example, because he says changing the constitution will not necessarily stop corruption and all the other aberrations that occur in this society. I wonder what your take is on this. Will the constitution help to prop up the utter collapse of values in this country?
I believe it will. First of all, the unity is key, or a sense of it. Justice is key, or a sense of it. Likewise, equity.
Indeed.
And therefore, in order to placate those that feel rightly or wrongly that they are marginalized, this process will manage, like what Doc said, the perception issue, and then deal with the structural issue. Okay? That beyond that, I've also said in many fora, and I've written about it.
Yeah, and you actually wrote an article recently.
Absolutely,
about this
and I'm going to take an
thing.
excerpt of that to buttress what you said, what Dr. Adeni and Dr. Dokuku is saying. That the citizens of this country need to wake up and recognize that the political class will not hand over what they want on a platter. And speaking to the citizens, and speaking particularly to you, myself, Dr. Dokuku Peterside, the elites, we have been serially underserving
Well,
this
you're
country.
the elite, I'm not the elite.
Because, you see, why am I saying so? Amongst us, we have the CEOs, the DGs, the ministers, the PAMSECs that are part of what I call the corruption value chain. But more importantly, how will the citizens participate? Because we are a subset of a society. And like Dr. Dokuku is saying, if the value system is broken, then you have a problem. And I will take an excerpt of, a quote from Rohini Lelikani. She's a writer, an author, and a political analyst. In 2013, she wrote an article, and I take an excerpt of it. She said, quote, "We cannot be mere consumers of good governance," that is citizens. We must be participants, okay? We must be co-creators of good governance. As citizens, we have to co-create good governance. We cannot outsource it to the political class and hope to be passively happy consumers. Like everything worth its while, good governance must be earned. And what that means is that citizens should also understand that they have roles to play. So while we are speaking about the political class and we are finger pointing, they are a product of a society. And therefore, putting pressure on the political class to deliver, constructively so, rightly so, and in a civil manner, especially the elite, like I said, if you look at the demography of the voting pattern, most of the people that are collecting spaghetti are not the elites. The elites are busy watching this, sipping juice, while these people are in the reins and we are judging them. Okay, we don't participate in the electoral process. Most of us don't even have voters cards.
That is very true.
And then in terms of governance, we participate, aid and abet.
Yeah.
You know, corruption by the virtue of our positions about PAMSECs or directors or whatever, deputy directors within the civil service. And then we come and pontificate and continue judging and telling people that are the masses that they are collecting money, while the billions and trillions that are being shared by the political class, we take a percentage of it. So we need to have that in our consciousness in these engagements. Even when they do the town hall meetings, Charles, and the public hearings, we don't attend. While we are the subject matter experts. And this grammar we are blowing here, we should blow it at the National Assembly, you know, during the public hearings going forward. So I think we need to wake up as elites to understand the value we are going to add. We are not as much in population, but the value and the impact we will give will be very impactful.
I think you make a lot of sense. I want to just move on a little bit from that, because there was another issue that came up that kind of dovetails into this, and that is the fact that just, I think it was barely a couple of days ago, or a day ago or so, you had the Council of State meeting in the presidency. I believe it was yesterday. They gave a vote of confidence to President Tinubu. How deserving do you think Mr. Tinubu was of that vote of confidence? Or is it of no significance as far as you're concerned?
Charles, in the presidential system, when elites give themselves a pat on the back, there's nothing to celebrate. So they are all members of the same class, club of former presidents, club of governors. Giving themselves a pat, you know, is nothing to... It is a tradition borrowed from the parliamentary system. I'm sure you know that.
Right.
So in this specific instance, I don't think there's anything unique about it. I think the issues remain that Nigeria is facing, you know, the kind of challenge that we have not faced in a long while. And that the earlier we find solution to this challenge, the better for all of us. We're simply sitting on a keg of gunpowder, and it might just explode any moment from now. So it's not the time for us to just go giving ourselves, you know, high five. No, we must show that we're by far more serious-minded than that. So if you ask me, I don't think that's of any consequence, you know. And
but I wonder if there's a political sort of thing there, given the fact that whether the weight of it is kind of lessened, even if you think it's not that important, by the fact that two significant former heads of state, I mean, Olusegun Obasanjo, who's still very active politically, and Ibrahim Babangida were absent.
Well, Doctor Charles, you see, the self-appraisal Doctor is talking about is of no consequence. First of all, for me as a citizen of this country, as a progressive, I think what is important is, the body language is even not right. Because we beg people for votes, we told them every sort of thing. And then we get into office, we take out of office, we take instrument of power and coercion, and we turn against them. We speak with them with a sense of entitlement, we insult them, and we call them, you know, people that are against you. Everybody knows. Charles, in some part of this country, I can speak for the north, some people are eating grass. I can tell there's what we call tafasa is grass. They compete it with animals. We used to feed animals that particular grass.
That's shocking.
And that is the reality. And you have people in government, including handlers of Mr. President, coming to insult these people and say they are opposition. You see, The moment you become fixated on your opponent, in this case opposition, you lose touch with reality. And the truth is, we are a citizen, we are a country that is highly political conscious at this point in time of our political history. Right. So as far as I'm concerned, the government should be looking and be listening to the people, not PowerPoint presentations. Okay. What are the points, what are speaking to us in terms of insecurity and hunger on the ground, in the land, in the entire country, not one section, is the issue, not about opposition party.
Okay, and on that rather depressing note, I want to thank both of you very much indeed. I know it was a fairly short segment, but your contributions have been absolutely sterling, as usual. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, and Dr. Dakuku Peterside is an author, columnist, former member of the House of Representatives. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.